Hello there, I'm Callum Johns and welcome to the EU in Review, where I review the Star Wars Expanded Universe as I experience it. This time I'm going to be continuing with my reviews of the classic Marvel Star Wars run. I know, comics are easier to read than the novels, so I'm just sort of ploughing through these, and I'm still reading X-Wing, Rogue Squadron, later on. Well, that's fine. This time it's issues 45 to 50 in my journey to issue 108, which I did get. I'm going to review later once I've finished the entire original run. So issue 45 is written by Archie Goodwin and illustrated by Callum and Cantina. And as always, I'm going to be just giving my thoughts on things as I read it, so I just wrote down notes as I read it. I like how they show an Imperial probe droid being deadlier, so they have a more advanced type of probe droid compared to the ones we see in Empire Strikes Back, which is cool. We have the first and only mention of the planet Nutra-4, which is interesting. Now, there's some things that only appear once in the EU and then they don't get mentioned anywhere else. There's a lot of potential for planets and things to be reused still, I think. In the EU, of course. And yes, as I mentioned earlier, especially augmented probe to be able to destroy everything and take over, which ends up being a downfall, which is cool. You have to read the story for that. And Admiral Damon Krell appears, and he's an Imperial. Is his name connected to General Krell in the Clone Wars TV series? There's possibly a connection with the name there. I mean, he's not a basilisk, he's a human. But there, that's fun. The scale for Yoda is better, so when they're actually drawing Yoda, the scale is more accurate. And of course they draw Yoda again because it recaps the end of Empire Strikes Back. Even though it was just the last issue. But, I mean, it makes sense, I guess, but I just read Empire Strikes Back as I'm reading through it. But in the case of when these were coming out, they're about a month apart, so people may have forgotten. I don't know. Luke propels himself with his blaster, which I thought was interesting, in space. So he's in space and he fires a blaster to propel himself a certain direction. So it must have some kickback on the blaster that we usually don't see as much with the blasters in the movies. And basically when it's convenient, it has kickback. And here's where we start going, hang on, classic Marvel Star Wars, you're S-canon, because Luke still has his lightsaber. This is after Empire Strikes Back, so that means that they made an error after watching Empire Strikes Back. There's weird grammar in one part on page 15, I'll chuck it up. But yeah, some of the grammar's a bit weird, doesn't quite work. Calls the Viper probe droid a Probot, which is the first appearance of that name for it. And I was thinking, reading these comments, Luke seems awfully cocky for almost nearly dying. And I think Luke should have been a bit more thoughtful and careful after being defeated by Vader. But he just gallivants around going, hey, I can do this, I can do this. So the thing with this Viper probe droid is a bit weird because it has conflicting programming, and that ends up saving Luke because the orders from Vader override the orders from the Imperial admirals that modified it to be even more powerful. And such conflicted programming overloads the logic capacitors, which makes sense, and it builds on 3PO mentioning logic circuits in. So issue 46, which is written by Archie Goodwin and illustrated by Callum and Infantino. And these are all one-shots, by the way. These are singular stories in these issues putting together. I try to do the story arcs together, but if I try to do just one issue at a time, I feel like that's not enough for an episode of this. So, issue 46. I like how Lando and Chewie stick together. And here we go. Chewie says Groot. So, we have our Guardians of the Galaxy and Star Wars crossover. Ha! I like how Chewie's consistently well drawn properly now, because before they didn't get him quite right. Now they are, which is nice. Yes, this issue is interesting. Cody's son child says they're in a different dimension from what they're birthed in, caused by an exploding warp engine, which would be a hyperdrive. Maybe this is explored somewhere else, this whole idea of different dimensions, but it opens up a whole realm of possibilities. Especially since S canon is still, this is what happened, just the details are different. The different dimensions still exist in Star Wars. At least that's how I perceive it. And that can easily explain some quite different things. And opens up the possibilities of even the Infinity stories being canon. Next, we have a female captain of the Star Destroyer, which is quite rare, but it makes sense because they chucked her on the Outer Rim, and they didn't give her a very good job, other than like commanding a Star Destroyer, which is cool, but in a less important area. And Cody's son child gained gate power and become a monk-like figure in this different dimension, which is weird. His species, a Joshwick, can harness the energy. I don't really understand how it works. All they say is this happens and this is, and it doesn't really make sense in Star Wars, in my opinion, to have all this super powerful energy. But then another way, if there's different dimensions and everything, it does, but it needs to not get too carried away. Of course, this only appears in this comic, and this power, it seems, is to warp dimensions, so it's to warp between different dimensions, which it makes sense, given the right situation. They don't really explain it very much in the comic, so it doesn't quite make sense within Star Wars, in my opinion. I like how it gives more to Lando's character and why he's fighting with the rebellion, and actually explains it, which is nice. It's quite an interesting issue, this one. It has me thinking of a lot of the possibilities of the alternate dimensions in Star Wars. Infinities could be canon, but a different dimension. If they go down that route a bit more, or if they went down that route, I guess they haven't now, so that's the way the news goes. Issue 47 is written by Archie Goodwin and illustrated by Carmine Infantino and Gene Day. It's titled Droid World, which is interesting. They made this into a book and record version called The Further Adventures Droid World, out of interest. I looked that up. And it's interesting how it throws you straight into the action with the droids being chased. And then it goes to the Force. I like these sorts of beginnings because they add a bit of intensity to it and you go, ooh, how are they going to end up throughout the whole story as it's leading up to it. I noticed that Luke has the rank of Commander, which is an interesting point to make. He's moving up in the ranks of the Rebellion. And this is also the only appearance of the planet Zeron, Xeron. I like the banter between R2 and 3PO. Archie Goodwin got that on point when he was writing it. It's awesome. And Droid World is a space station, which I didn't really expect, called Clixon's Moon, and it's full of droids other than Clixon himself, which is interesting. It only has the appearance here and in the book and record version, Further Adventures. Clixon appears to basically be the opposite of Valence. He is friendly with droids as a cyborg versus hating them, but then he hates humans, whereas Valence would have preferred humans over droids. So it's interesting to notice the comparison there. On page 11, Targ, T-A-G-G-E, is spelled, how do I sort of pronounce it? Targ, T-A-A-G-E, it's misspelled, at least in the copy that I was reading. It's also interesting how the droid was made by them, the Imperial War Droid. And the Imperial droid going to take over Droid World is pretty much expected from it to follow its programming, basically. I think the droid I meant earlier was actually this Imperial droid that was there, the ZX3. And I like how he sasses Clixon. It's fun. Good dialogue. It's the way it's written is older, but I like the way it's written in some ways because it just sasses and does things that are fun. It has fun with it, which is good. And R2 saves 3PO again, which is fun times with that. The magnetic grapples catching them is a fun twist, which I liked. Because of course you can't destroy the droids. They appear again later on, and they'll be a staple in the movies. Okay. Issue 48, which is written by Larry Hamm and illustrated by Carmine Infantino and Carlos Garzon. Almost like Garzon. I probably mentioned that before. Anyway, this is the first appearance of the planet Argo. It's the first time we see a full body X-ray in Star Wars, which is really cool to see. And there's one really tall guy, which is cool. There's a sergeant called Sergeant Rolex, which I thought was funny. They just named it after a Rolex. And in this story, Vader just seems to coincidentally appear at the same time as Leia. She has the same fire that's inside of her and boldly speaks out against him like he can't hurt her, even though he probably can just kill her and get away with it. And the planet or moon, Project 7, is first mentioned here. And it's only indirectly mentioned in Yoda Dark Rendezvous later on. And it's a really interesting idea that they put here, gold implants on ribs as a way to smuggle things in. So they need that full body X-ray because people put gold on their ribs. Cool idea, I like that. A wide shot of the city on Argo reminds me of the Jetsons for some reason. Probably that science fiction feel they were going for with that. And I love how Leia loopholes the law with the gravitational field disruptor. So, of course, Vader's trying to stop her, kill her and whatnot. And, of course, there's a no weapons rule, so they have fun. And Vader goes into a pose like the no pose, which is funny. And the shapeshifter in his natural form definitely looks like a vampire, like a classic vampire look, which is interesting. I love how Leia basically taunts Vader. Just says, come on, try and get me. It's just teasing him the whole time through. It's interesting how there's one of Vader's minions uses telekinetic powers, which is connected to the Force most likely, but it seems to be saying that it's a special species gift, so maybe it's a bit like not the Mirialans, but the Miralukans that are blind actually have a stronger connection to the Force. Maybe it's a natural disposition like that with telekinesis. I love Leia's cheeky smile in one panel, it's just so good. And the ending is a twist with the crown jewels of Alderaan. I like it. And for the specific details you can read it. But yeah, this issue is where Vader tries to destroy Leia's and the Rebellion's credit rating. It's just very interesting. I mean, on paper it sounds bad, but the little bits they put in there, with Leia just taunting Vader and teasing him and things, I just thought it was fun. And of course it's S-canon, so you don't really need to hold it to as high a standard, but it's still a story that could definitely have happened. Just the premise sounds a bit weird. Anyway. And issue 49 is written by Mike W. Barr and illustrated by Walt Simonson and Tom Palmer. This one is titled The Last Jedi, which is also the title of the novel that was published in 2013, which is written by Michael Reeves and Maya Catherine Bonhoff. That novel is the ending of the Coruscant Mines trilogy. Sort of a trilogy, but then The Last Jedi was plopped up there on the end as the ending, so it's sort of a 4-book series in the end. Anyway, this is The Last Jedi, the comic. The Y-Wing has landing gear like an airplane in real life, which I thought was interesting that they included that detail. I find it really interesting that the alien that refused to become a Jedi and then became delusional actually is similar in a way but different to Don Juan Quixote that they had earlier that teamed up with Jackson the Rabbit and all that. It is the first appearance of the planet Velmore, And there's a fun play on let the Wookiee win with let the Jedi win. And the female imp officer kisses Luke, and this is really interesting. Her trying to persuade him, and he's obviously disguised, is interesting. And it's really bold to actually put this in one of the early Star Wars comics, because I wouldn't have thought that this was something that kids would want to see. And, oh man, it's just an interesting storyline. And then another guy plots to take the throne himself. It's an ambitious story in scale. Then there's a whole thing with Leia kissing Dennett, it looks like. The story is just trying to mess with our heads, because it also leads along with this thing that Luke and Leia are supposed to be together. And so knowing that in the future they're siblings, interesting. Luke's lightsaber is red, and I don't know why. And also he still has it again. And then it turns orange in another panel. So some consistency issues there. I think it's great how Jedi saved Luke. Alien, that was the original. Really cool. But this being one issue, I feel like they could have expanded it upon a few more issues. Because for the intricacy of the plot line that they were trying to do in this one issue, it felt like it was really rushed. So they could have actually had a lot more potential for this to pick up later on. And I guess the Last Jedi in this, the title doesn't seem to be as relevant other than the Jedi was delusional about being a Jedi. Jedi. Anyway, on to issue 50, which is written by Archie Goodwin, illustrated by Al Williamson, Tom Palmer, and Walt Simonson. This is Crimson Forever, the storyline that issue 108 picks up. So I'm interested to see all the connections in here. I did read 108 once, and then I'm going to read it again after finishing all of these, so see how it all connects together. It's good. And Lando says a rebel blockade runner, but how does he know it's a rebellion ship? Why would the rebellion use ships that are easily identifiable by sight? You think that'd give them away? You think they'd use ones that are modified but they look like normal carriers and stuff? Anyway, it's interesting that they go from Hoth to a completely different planet, which is a lava planet. And who knows, George Lucas may have looked at this and gone, oh, a lava planet, I might include that somewhere later. Because, you know, George Lucas looked at the comics at least, because he included some things in the prequels, which is awesome. 3PO says thank the original maker instead of just thank the maker as he does in the movies. Just thought it was an interesting little tidbit there. The original maker. I wonder who was the original maker compared to just the maker. Maybe it's a play that they're making the comic, but the original maker of Star Wars is George Lucas, so thank him. I like to think of it that way. And I can only help imagine how much more tense it would be to have Luke in danger in these comics at the time when we didn't know his future. Because they have Luke in danger, like these cliffhanger things and all that, going, is he going to survive and whatnot? And now we have Return of the Jedi and everything. It's like, well, of course he does. But it's still really interesting to read how he survives and gets out of things. So Crimson Forever is a fitting name from how the victims actually turn up in the end there. And yep, here we go. Just like Han in some of the previous comics, Luke's shirtless in his dream for no reason. Although I guess in a dream it makes a bit more sense than in real life. But Luke's shirtless for no reason, so they just wanted to have shirtless dudes. And it's funny how the droid acts indignant in it. Droids with personalities are always interesting for me, especially when they make them a bit more of a joke, like 3PO and that. It's interesting to try and think of how the programming must have developed to be able to give them these personalities. The jewels being created from the galactic cataclysm is a good idea for the power that they actually have. And so what they find is that the Red Nebula was split off from the original Star Wars galaxy into a different area in the unknown regions by a galactic cataclysm, which I thought could have been connected to, I think it's in some of the later Marvel issues, but the Bedlam spirits and how they can manipulate matter and basically whatever they want, even though they've got a childish nature. The galactic cataclysm could actually be connected to these Bedlam spirits and super powerful beings, which I thought was cool. The monster seeing Chewie as one of its cubs is a weird moment, and the way it ends up being to save them is just like, it just feels anticlimactic and a bit of an ex machina that, oh, it sees Chewie as a cub, I gotta look after it, I'm not attacking you anymore. Why? Why can't you just defeat the monster in some inventive way? I guess it's different, so that's good. And the story of the Red Nebula is interesting, as I explained earlier. I like how they showed Chewie's anger towards Boba, because Boba Fett was the one that took Han, of course, so Chewie's angry at him, but I have to hold back. And IG-88 appears, and it's a cool way to have an enemy there, I think. And also, Dengar, Bosk, and Zuckuss are there, and they're together with Dominatarg, which is interesting. And it's interesting that it's all the same bounty hunters as in Empire Strikes Back, other than Boba being with them. Must have just been trying to play on using the same bounty hunters working together. Overall, for this issue, art has taken another step to be better, and this one's split into chapters. So, as far as the chapters go, it makes more sense for the sections of the story in this issue, and they gave chapters long enough to feel worth being a chapter, because they show you part of Dominatarg's story alongside the main rebellion story, which is cool. I like that. But overall, these issues, they're fun. There's definitely some really quirky things in it that don't quite make sense from the perspective of being a bit more grounded to reality, realistic Star Wars universe, as shown in a lot of the novels later on, but also having a bit of a fantasy element to it. They seem to lean a lot more into the fantasy side of it than they do the science fiction in these issues, which is cool. It's good to see a different type of story with that. Take things with a grain of salt, because they seem a bit weird, and I'm not sure. I'm still on the fence whether I actually like Star Wars going in the direction of having these super powerful spirits and everything, but I think they could make sense given the right explanation and story with them to be written in, which these comics at the moment haven't really explained how they exist and fit into the universe. I might find out later. But that is issues 45 to 50 and my thoughts on them. What do you think of these issues and the option of possible alternate dimensions tying in everything together to be even the Infinity storylines are canon in some way in an alternate dimension? That's what I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed listening to my thoughts, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.